Right, hello. Now, how do I do this? Do I do this the Jonathan Wilson way, really sarcastic, or do I do it the Rory Smith way, which is, I think Rory meant it, man. But what we're talking about here is, listen, us at Libero, we're really enjoying putting this podcast out. We're really enjoying a lot of the feedback we're receiving. Listen, Arsenal fans, I know I'm boring, but just let everyone else live, even if I'm on here. But what we're asking for here is that you, if you like the show, even if you don't like the show, that you give us a good rating, good reviews on all the various channels. So that's Apple Podcasts, that's your Acast, that's your Spotify and YouTube in particular. And hopefully that may help us continue this, because, as I say, we really enjoy it, and it would go some way to keeping us keeping on. So there you go. Right, okay, so on with episode number 23. You've hopefully listened to episode 2022, live from Munich, though obviously not live at the time, but in which the chaps, Rory and Miguel and special guests, went over the events in Munich, the Champions League final. But there's three different heads here today. We've got to think of it in a different way. Miguel would have joined us actually, but thanks to a combination of German-Irish inefficiency, that's not his own, that's of a certain airline, he is currently eyeing the trouser press in a Munich hotel room. So that rather dates us to recording this on Monday. But instead, and they're always going to join us, we've got Tariq Panja of the New York Times, and of course Jonathan Wilson of the extended Jonathan Wilson universe, a man seen and unheard across the football media matrix. So anyway, back to Munich, events on Saturday. One of those games that it was decided so early. It was so obvious that was going to happen in that game. It gave us plenty of time to contemplate the implications. One of them was that football is a young man's game. Ageism may be the last taboo, but it's certainly applicable in football. Oh dear, you felt sorry for a Serb, you felt sorry for Mkhitaryan running around after those young lads in the PSG shirts. And there's lots of implications. The financial aspects, the governmental aspects, style of play. What happens now for Italian football? I think they're really going through an existential crisis. But let's start with Tariq. And as Miguel put this in the piece he wrote for The Independent, this is a victory for Qatar. What are the implications of that?
Yeah, can I say there's certain images. You remember the World Cup in final Qatar 2022?
Yes.
When you have the Emir of Qatar looming behind Lionel Messi, much taller than him, with a word we all learnt that evening, abished, the traditional black robe, and putting it on Lionel Messi. I'll never forget that, because we were, working that night. You're filing quite frantically at that point as well. What's just happened here? Anyway, so that happened there, and then the other night, so Champions League final, team from Paris Saint-Germain, playing in a stadium in Munich against Inter Milan of Italy. And I was watching at a friend's house. Funny enough, one of the youngest son of Helena Herrera, who lives in London. He's a professor here. He'd given up watching a long time ago, I must say. I was disappointed he didn't stick with the game. But anyway, Helios, if you're listening, I looked up, and you see government minister of the state of Qatar in that game. I was being lifted up like a trophy above the heads of the winning team. Now, I don't know, politically, you ask, what does it mean? That's quite a powerful image for Qatar, isn't it? That their emissary to football is being lauded by that great young team as the winner of the Champions League. I think that in itself was a big moment. And you had you had Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, a day later thanking Qatar for giving Paris and France this victory. and you have a stadium caked in sort of Qatar Airways, livery. It's all very, very powerful and very symbolic, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's state power that Miguel in particular has railed against, and it's this idea that at a certain point, football clubs were seen as an ideal vehicle for certain Arab states. Now, it's not new to sport. If you're a racing fan, this has gone on since the early 80s. Dubai, the Sheikh Al Maktoum, and funny enough, if you follow racing as I do, some of the same characters seem to pop up. Kia Joorabchian has become one of the biggest owners in racing. But it's interesting, isn't it, that Qatar's influence on the world of football did not stop on that day when Lionel Messi put on that garment. And it feels like with that PSG team, they're here to stay. What do you think about that, Jonathan?
Well, I don't know if you're talking about the wider context of this. I don't know if you noticed who won the African Champions League this weekend, but it was Pyramids FC. And do you know the origins of Pyramids FC? They were the team founded by Turki Al Sheikh, so MBS's former right-hand man, let's call him. That's probably legally safe.
You could call him bodyguard as well if you want. I think that's what you wanted to say.
No.
He was.
That wasn't the word. I know he was, but that wasn't the word I was looking for, or wasn't the word I was trying to avoid. Turki Al Sheikh, he wanted to buy Al Ahly in Cairo, couldn't get the job done. So his solution to this is to buy, I think they were a third division team, pump loads of money into them, make them the Pyramids FC, and now they're the champions of Africa. So this has been a great, great weekend for the sports washing projects of the Middle East. So yeah, and the problem with this is you find yourself having to go over the same old ground over and over and over again, and you're aware that I've said this before, I can't say this again, but you have to say it again because it keeps happening, and if we stop, nobody talks about it, and people will say, the private equity firms who buy into football clubs are ruthlessly capitalistic, often deeply inhumane, and that is often true. You have individuals who buy into football clubs who are often pretty unpleasant people. We shouldn't pretend that football has ever been this sort of innocent, naive world where your friendly local rich man buys his club and he's got all his money by being a decent bloke, but just by being good at stuff. That world never happened. Owners of football clubs have, by and large, often been horrible. A state is still different. It's still another level. Because no matter what these private equity firms have done, no matter what these individuals have done, they are not states where there is massive repression and freedom of expression, where same-sex relationships are banned, where women live under rules of male guardianship, where workers' rights are essentially non-existent. That puts it on a wholly different level. And essentially, state is a state. An individual is an individual. Their level of wealth is very, very different. The fact that Qatar can turn to Qatar Airways, Qatari tourism, and get deals done, I can't believe those negotiations are a difficult negotiation. The whole thing is very, very different. So that's why I think Miguel is right to rail against state ownership of clubs. That there's many, many, many things wrong with the ownership of clubs, but states owning them is the worst of the things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a truism, isn't it, that nobody particularly nice ever owned a football club, and even Delia Smith got a bit angry when she'd had a few, So it's just one of those things that it's happened. I mean, Jonathan, we look back to that 70s era of, your Bob Lords and your Sam Longson. Sam Longson actually a drinking partner of my late grandfather up in the Derbyshire Hills. But
he was a man who was desperately outwitted by Brian Clough. I mean, I don't think he was like an evil man. He was just a man, a slightly pompous man who Clough ran rings around. But yes.
Yes, exactly. But ego is part of it, as it is with Nasser El Khalifi, who is the guy at the centre of this. And it's funny you mentioned Macron. The influence of Qatar within France is significant. But there is a point, I suppose, where people will say, "Well, who cares?" I mean, that's the most common response is, "Who cares?" A friend of mine working out at Roland Garros sent me a picture of all the fireworks going on Paris was burning, actually. Unfortunately, things turned a little ropey with the celebrations there. But do people care enough, despite the efforts of people like Miguel and Tariq and many others? It's one of those issues that, is it at a tipping point where we have to accept this, or is it going to change? My answer is probably the negative. But Tariq, what's your thought on that? What could change this?
The only thing we saw with the Super League, something like that, is a groundswell of public displeasure. But I don't think we're going to see that because of the tribalism here as well. Like, we've seen this elsewhere, and it's not these particular teams or this set of fan groups. I think there's loads of fan groups. You saw with the Manchester United takeover that ended up with Ratcliffe owning the team, but there was a huge number of Manchester United fans and people who follow the team hoping that some sort of Qatari overlord is going to come and save them from the misery of the last decade. And I think these teams and the people behind them, that tribalism is good for them, and that's also what they're buying for. You've suddenly got thousands, if not millions, of people suddenly well versed in your talking points, if that's what you want. Whether it's about the butchering of a journalist in an embassy in Istanbul is suddenly now questioned and quibbled by people associated with the football team in the northeast of England, and throwing shade and smoke around that. It's just a really weird thing that we're talking about, isn't it? It's football, and then we're talking about state power and this behaviour. I don't think it's going to change really, and I also think the thing with Nasser Al Khalifi and Qatar, which is different to City in a way. City have kind of been always alongside and outside the football norms, the establishment. Paris Saint-Germain and Qatar very firmly have got their focus has been, we're not just going to build a brilliant football team. We're going to be able to engineer ourselves into a position where we are in all of the main rooms. And they are. And through this one dude as well, through Nasser Al Khalifi, and people have heard this before, but it's worth talking about how many rooms and how many hats this guy wears. So he is, the owner of beIN Media Group, which owns beIN Sports, the Middle Eastern broadcaster. That's pumped in billions into European leagues all over the continent and into teams. He's on the board of UEFA, the organisation that is responsible for the Champions League. He's UEFA's biggest customer as the president of this television channel. Because of the Super League, somehow they found a way that only this guy can lead the European Club Association, that body, that extremely powerful body, that is UEFA's joint venture partner for broadcast. So Nasser Al Khalifi is the president for that. This is an insane amount of control or power that one group can have over football. Now, how is that going to change? I really don't see it. And what I'm surprised by is Qatar here, I think, have acted completely rationally. They've got what they wanted. So they've got all of these places, they've got all these jobs, and if you were going to be on their side, say, right, we've mission accomplished. But what's interesting is football has allowed all of this to happen. It's all happened. And I don't see clubs clamouring publicly, their rivals screaming about this. It might be fans of people like us maybe talking about it on the odd podcast, but football has allowed this to happen.
Yeah, there's a few questions raised over the television coverage of this event over the weekend. And let's talk from the point of view of TNT in the UK and CBS in the US. Now, I obviously didn't catch as much of the CBS coverage, but it did appear that Tom Cruise and David Beckham were in some sort of thing like Butler's cabin that you see on the end of the Masters, didn't they? Where they're sort of discussing the match. It was one of the most stilted pieces of broadcasting I think I've ever seen. And there is this idea, and this happened in 2023, with that rather unfortunate commentary by Darren Fletcher, which was, this is the greatest story ever told, or something like that, about Manchester City, which I think what Fletch was actually doing was talking about City's rise from playing at Macclesfield in 1999 to, becoming Champions League winners, as if this is a great romantic story. Now, not everybody sees that as a romantic story because, of course, they were bought by a Gulf state. Much the same happened with Paris Saint-Germain at the weekend. I mean, we had a greater emphasis on the great travails of supporting a club of Julian Laurens than we did of the fact that this is a club related to Qatar. Now, what when I was a lad, I was a fan of Public Enemy. He had this idea called edutainment, which is you tackle social political issues while providing entertainment. Football doesn't really do that anymore, does it? It's always just, that's not for me to discuss. Here's the football. If you want to discuss it, go in another forum. And also, the other thing, of course, and Tariq referred to, is the fact that broadcasters don't want to rock the boat, because if you do rock the boat about PSG, are you going to get that TV contract next time? If you are TNT, annoying Nasser El Khalifi, well, that's probably not a good idea. So we're in this bind, aren't we? When did television stop being... when did journalism stop on TV is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of what Lord Reith's aim was when setting up the BBC, it was to educate while entertaining. And he would definitely put education as the higher priority than entertainment. Now, if you look at some of the BBC's early output, I would suggest some rebalancing was probably necessary. But one of the things that I think we've got a huge problem with in modern media, and this isn't just to do with rights holders, is this confusion over what it is to go and cover a game. That I think is very, very hard to categorise a lot of what people who go on media accreditation do at games as journalism. And so you have some people in that press room being held to the ethical standards that journalists should maintain, and some people not held by that. And unfortunately, the ones who are not held by that seem to be a lot more popular. And that's a massive issue we've got. And yeah, if the rights holders find that people turn off if you start talking about the political background, I understand why their impetus is not to bother with that. I understand you don't want to put your rights at risk. I understand if you're an individual broadcaster, you're thinking, these are not secure jobs. I might need to go and do a Keys and Gray and get a job in Doha next year. You don't want to annoy people. So in the end, the people with the power win. And, at a much smaller level, Cristiano Ronaldo owns most of the media in Portugal. So, it's not just states. It's that media companies now are being bought up by people who can then... And I guess to an extent, when Lord Harmsworth is running the Daily Mail, he's running it for his own ends, obviously.
Yes. Or
Lord Rothermere, that's why these newspaper barons get involved in media. But it just seems to be happening to a greater and greater degree these days.
Is it also a little bit of two things? One, some of the former players, for example, they have other jobs where they might also work for beIN as well, and then appear on something like TNT or CBS, and it's a very small world there. The weird thing is, these people don't actually need the money, so they could actually say a lot more than everyone else if they chose to. But maybe you just love being on TV and commentating, or commenting after a match. But it'd be interesting to see if someone who, these are multimillionaires, they've got a lot more ability to say whatever they like if they wanted to. Shame maybe they don't use it. And then the second point is, and this is a thing that I'm finding more and more with our business, is this trade in access. So there's suddenly I saw a lot of talking points that were very, very specific to what the PSG press office will be pumping out, particularly on, say, I don't know, influencer style journalists. And then in exchange, we're in the transfer window, aren't we? Let's see who breaks all the weird, the big transfer stories here, or someone might end up getting an interview with, I don't know, Nasser El Khalifi, and it'll be all very positive about what's happened and got into PSG. So there are a lot of these tensions with with this, but it's probably bigger than Qatar and PSG.
I mean, this is to an extent always happened, right? But if you're a local paper and you cover your local club, you've got to be really careful about going for them, because if they say, well, you can't come in the press box, you can't speak to any of our players, what are you actually putting out there? So to an extent, that deal's always been done, but it's just how blatant it is now. So I mean, you saw it after Newcastle won the Carabao Cup. Loads of Newcastle fan channels suddenly broadcasting these, why don't you join in the celebrations by flying over to Riyadh right now for a great night out? And look, if Visit Saudi want to pay us £5 million to sponsor us for a year, we'll talk. But it's just like, come on, there's not, the pretense has gone even.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about that influencer, I show speed. I know that he, this chap who, well, I really don't know what his deal is, and nor do I have much desire to know, but he's there on that CBS sort of desk that they have, and, they get to chat to all the players, and I believe him and Gianni Infantino have been knocking around, and at the same point that, listen, Tariq, I'm sure you're asking daily for an interview with Gianni and you're getting no dice. It's
asking for a press conference with Gianni, let alone an interview. We haven't had one in 2 years.
But Tariq, I told you, I'm doing this World Cup book. History of the World Cup's coming out in October. One of Gianni's people got in touch with me and said, Gianni's very happy to do the forward. I was like, I don't think Gianni would be very happy to read the last sort of 3 or 4 chapters. This is not happening. But it was, again, yes, I presume that was a very... It's a very blatant attempt to kind of, he'll do the forward, we'll help you promote it, but, go easy on the stuff.
Okay.
I had an altercation, actually. I'd not heard of this I Show Speed either until it was just 2 men who should never bump into each other. It was the Euro 2024 final in Berlin, just going up to the press room, and this guy came bursting through the doors into the press area with a couple of burly security guards. And he was dressed in a Ronaldo shirt, Portugal shirt or something, bizarre. And he said, they're chasing me. And there's all these, he's got his cameras on. I said, well, who's chasing you? They're chasing me, man. And I was like, no, hang on. You're making content. And this was nonsense. So I Show Speed's shtick, it seems, is being chased through streets in various cities in Europe when it comes to football, and barking or howling like a dog. And that seems to be the sum total of what was happening. And there was, and I felt, hang on a minute, we should say something here. Like, we're trying to do work. This fellow's come bursting through to make content. And the space media has, and space for journalism is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, I'd say. And then you're confronted with this clown. And it was, that's who they want in there, rather than say, you guys, because they prefer that. This guy probably has a lot of people like listening to a young man howling like a dog. He has 2 to 3 million followers on each of these platforms. And it's a different audience. So why Gianni Infantino would want to talk to this guy is he'll never ask any of these questions. They'll make some, I don't know what they'll do, clown around for a bit. And it's this network effect. He's got an audience that is completely different to football's audience or FIFA's audience. Multiply all that together and you've got, a much bigger. That's why he was with, I guess, the gang at CBS. The world is changing, guys. You're not going to get an answer to your question, though.
Yeah, but well, perhaps we can get James Horncastle to howl like a dog on the next episode. That could be the way
anyone heard
forward.
From James? We lost James.
Yeah, well, yes, I was about to get to that. Inter, it didn't go well, did it? No, to say the least. It's deep embarrassment appears to be the overriding emotion there. A lot of tears on the field. Bastoni, who I think had a great season in the Champions League at least, just almost you couldn't stop the guy crying. It was terrible. Now, Nicky Bandini wrote one of these paper reviews for The Guardian on Sunday, and there's some great comments from the Italian press. I mean, Jonathan, you struggle to put anything together as flowery as this, but let's have a go. So this is Luigi Garlando in, I think, the Gazzetto. And he said, from yesterday for Inter supporters, Munich and Bavaria is no longer the kingdom of the beloved Calla Rummenigge, nor the mall ridden by Nicolino Berti, but a land of shame. I mean, that's good, isn't it? That's yeah. I mean, I think you quoted Shakespeare once in an intro from Kazan, but that's their own creation there. When fans experience embarrassment, such a bewildering, humiliating display, so much they suffer just for their sense of belonging, there is no more appropriate term. A disgrace for Italian football too. I mean, they did come up against a better team. They weren't unlucky, but that feels harsh, doesn't it?
It feels. I mean, it does feel harsh, yes. But I don't know. My sort of feeling with this game, and this is the problem when you've done the job as long as we have. You end up experience actually trips you up because you end up second guessing yourself.
Yes.
So I'd spent, before the semi-final against Barca, I was thinking this Inter aren't all that. They'll get found out by first quick team we'll play against will do them, and then they beat Barca. You think actually maybe they're doing something I'm not quite seeing. And the whole way, from the end of the semi-final to the final, I felt myself all the time correcting my underlying assumption that PSG would win quite easily. And I kept saying, I like the way that Inzaghi has them. Sometimes in a 3, sometimes in a 4, sometimes they press, sometimes they drop deep. They're very flexible. This team of warriors. And the voice at the back of my head is always like, "What are you talking about? PSG are going to murder them." But I thought, I watched those two semi-finals, and the assumption of the commentators all the way through, up until extra time, was, well, Barca will win it eventually. It's a bit freakish Inter still in the game. And what's annoying is it turns out the commentators were right. That it was a bit freakish they were still in that game. It was a bit freakish they won it. And, brilliant, they did it. Brilliant football allows a team to sort of cling on like that and score from set plays, score from counter-attacks. But if I were Hansi Flick watching that final on Saturday, I'd be thinking, what have I done? Like, how did I not beat this lot? How could I be so sloppy on set plays? How could I not work out how to just drop 10 yards and not get done on the counter all the time? And so, I don't know what I think of Inzaghi now. I've seen his record over the last 3 years. He's obviously good, right? You can't do what he's done and not be good. You can't get to 2 Champions League finals and not be good. They were the better side against City for much of that game. They're a little bit unfortunate in that game. But they were absolutely awful on Saturday. They didn't seem to have any clue of how to stop PSG's rotations in midfield. They didn't seem to have any way to react to that. And they seemed to give up pretty quickly. So, Tao, you mentioned Elenio Herrera's son. Elenio Herrera's Inter in 1967. If you talk to Takisio Bergnic, who was a right back in that game, he says we gave up in the second half because we knew we just couldn't cling on. We were exhausted physically, emotionally, mentally. That season, they had a very tight league race of falling away. I think the last game of the league season was actually after the European Cup final against Mantova, which I think if they'd won that, they'd still have won the league. They had a 4-point lead at one point. They lost to Mantova and ended up giving away the title. But they were just done. They were just physically, mentally, psychologically wrecked. And I think it was a similar thing on Saturday, that there's a wave after wave after wave of PSG pressure. They couldn't deal with it. And there's been 189 games in the Champions League this season. It's just a shame that Henrik Mkhitaryan are playing all of them.
Could it be that two things are true here as well? In that Barcelona are a flawed team. Yes, they were quite good to watch this year. But I think the goalkeeper in the back four of Barcelona, compared to what PSG put out, I think it's incomparable.
100%.
Barcelona, I think, can be beaten, and they were as freakish as those games were. They were great to watch, but they were great to watch because these were flawed teams as well. In a way, I thought that Barcelona was brittle in a way that PSG were not. So we really enjoyed watching those young forwards at PSG this year, Doué and Barcola and Dembele, not too young, and then Cavachila, and it's been interesting and really cool to watch. But I also think at the back they've looked quite solid. Even when they could have got done by Villa as well, they hung on. I don't think Barcelona would have hung on in a game like that. So I think there is this the fact they came up against a team that could also defend. And then on the Inter point, what's interesting, and this is different to PSG, and this tells you about why state ownership, just to go back to that, isn't great for football. Inter will probably now have to suffer a bit. You know, these players, we've said they're old. You're going to have to regenerate a team. That takes probably a few cycles to try and do. They've got to get the age down. Now, if you look at the PSG journey to finally winning this thing, they haven't really had to suffer the type of cyclical problems real teams will, because the ownership is able to somehow reach into whatever resources it has and work to whichever plan. Is it the celebrity plan? Is it the young French plan? Is it the young people from all over the world plan? There's no cost to failure. And what you would say, well, there should be a cost because, hang on, there's the FFP and there's all these rules. But we've also said they've got a lot of power. Somehow, they've managed to have all this money and they've had to all these iterations. And I think this team, optically, is the best thing that could have happened for PSG to win, because we're all talking about, they've won without the superstar team. They've won with these new ideas with these young people. There's no big star. So the criticism is lessened in a way. If Messi, Neymar, and Mbappe had won this, everyone said, well, of course you've got all the best players. Of course you're going to win this thing. You're not saying that this time. And then they've been able to keep doing this iteration without getting caught with FFP. And you have to ask why. And is it because you are so powerful in the corridors of power as well? Inter and any normal team, just they work to a different cycle, the one that we're probably more used to. This is a whole different world.
Yeah. I was going to say that some wider themes of the Champions League season had that bigger group stage. Now, I still remember Paris Saint-Germain struggling at a certain point in that group stage, and yet they come through and win, quite easily, and obviously the best team. Jonathan, you were a naysayer of this new great group stage development. Do you think you proved right on this?
I still have a lot of doubts about the group stage. I mean, look, we've seen teams before, Real Madrid almost every season, not a particularly good group stage, do enough to get through, come alive in the knockouts. That's a familiar formula for European success. So I'm not sure it makes that much difference. PSG did finish in the top 16, so they didn't benefit from the playoff. I think, were they 15th in the end out of 16? I think they had to beat, who did they have to beat on the final day? They had to win it. Were they away in Stuttgart on the final day?
They battered them, didn't they?
So, they had to win that. Yeah, I mean, basically from the game where they came from behind to beat City, where they were absolutely sensational in the second half of that game, they've looked the best side in Europe. And you often kept wondering, can they keep it going? But the truth is that, this formula is not an easy one, but because they weren't being particularly tested at home, now it can mean a side loses its cutting edge. That's a familiar pattern. I think it's happened to Bayern at times late in seasons that they've won the league and so they rest players, they don't have that sharpness, and they end up not perhaps getting the results they should get later in knockout competition in Europe. But PSG seem to have been able to manage that and they used the rest well. Now it'll be interesting to see what happens next season. Tariq, last time we were on together, you were talking about the collapse of DAZN in France and the catastrophic issues that could cause to every team who aren't PSG in France, that they might win the league even more easily next season. So you'll see if they can maintain their edge. But basically, since they signed Kvaratskhelia for 70 million in January, they've been unstoppable. They've been brilliant. And in that sense, it's actually a not dissimilar season. In fact, the way they've taken off from January, it's not dissimilar from when Luis Enrique won the Champions League in 2015. Where, if you remember, Barcelona looked to be falling apart that January, that Zubizarreta was sacked as sporting director and Messi got dropped for a game and pulled out of training with gastroenteritis, and so Xavi had to have a strong word to him to say, what are you doing? Stop messing this up. So I think it's maybe part of the Luis Enrique programme, as it has been part of the Pep Guardiola programme, that you time your run. Yeah, Alex Ferguson did it as well. Time your run to get really hit your straps January, February, and accelerate from there. In terms of the group stage, just to answer that specific point briefly, what I don't understand is some of the most vociferous supporters of the new group stage were Celtic fans saying, this is brilliant, we're still in the Champions League in January, we've got the playoff. And, they very nearly beat Bayern. They could easily have beaten Bayern. So they did well in the playoff. But they were between 17th and 24th. Under the old system, they'd have dropped into the Europa League. And if I were a Celtic fan, I'd be thinking, well, nothing in the Europa League to scare us. We could have beaten Tottenham. We could have beaten Manchester United.
Mm.
In that sense, the new format has cost Celtic a decent crack at winning a trophy.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, my sense is that the wider implication is the weakening of the Europa League. Now, I wasn't
absolutely.
the biggest fan of clubs dropping in. I mean, Sevilla would do it every year and then win it or whatever. And it became... But it just felt like the Europa League was a poor competition, and the two teams that got to the final weren't very good, as we know. And as for the Conference League, and funny enough, the Conference League is probably also drained a bit away from the Europa League at the other end. So it feels that they've somehow managed to make this sort of central competition weaker, which I don't think is for the good. And we'll. It's not been great. The other thing to say, and you mentioned Pep Guardiola there. We always mention Pep Guardiola. This about tactics, about style. Now, Guillaume Balaguer has become something of a defender of the faith. Part of the CBS team, I think, with I Show Speed. And we're talking about how it all goes back to Pep style football. That there has been this idea this season that it's over for Pep. It's over for his, the way that he plays the game. But actually, if you look at the top three in the Premier League, you look at the best teams in the Premier League, in the Champions League, that they are all following that model. And you might say, Jonathan, they all go back to the Hungarian model of the 1920s. I'm sure you
I would say that, yes.
Yes, I know you would. That's why I said it. But what's different? I mean, there is a possibility it might be over for Pep, but Luis Enrique and other managers are taking it a step on. That's the case, isn't it? That's what it felt like in this Champions League.
That is what it feels like, yeah. So, I mean, the odd thing, when Guardiola got the Barca B job, it had already been offered to Luis Enrique, and they had to, shamefacedly go to Luis Enrique and say, sorry, we're going to give it to Pep instead. So, they're very, although it feels like Luis Enrique's taking it on, they are contemporaries. They played in the same Barca side in the 90s. They were part of that great symposium there, if you like, with Louis van Gaal and Jose Mourinho as an assistant coach, Ronald Koeman in that side as well. But I think what you can see is Luis Enrique's, he likes his forwards to run with the ball much more than Guardiola certainly did. I think Guardiola, one of his great strengths has been his adaptation. I think a lot of people, I mean, I know Gary Neville said this, found the Luis Enrique incarnation of Barcelona in 2015 a more enjoyable watch than the Guardiola Barca. I think what you'd say, I mean, I totally understand that argument, but I think there was a real shock of anew with Guardiola. This was a type of football, this was a real revolution happening in front of our eyes, of the sort that I'd certainly thought was not possible anymore in modern football, that it's such a mature game that you can't have these huge leaps forward. So, the impact when Brazil unleashed the back four in 1958, and everyone's go, oh my God, what have they done? I thought, we'll never get that. Well, Guardiola in 2008-09 was the closest that we're going to get to that. So you've got to give Guardiola huge credit for that. Is Luis Enrique's football ahead of his now? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it develops. What I find slightly odd is that Luis Enrique's Spain, and maybe this is related to the aftermath of his daughter's death and everything, but his Spain side did not have the same directness that we've seen since. It's almost like De La Fuente's Spain is more Luis Enrique than Luis Enrique's Spain was. I don't quite understand why that was. If you think of them at the Euros in, Euro 2020, which happened in 2021, that game against Sweden in particular, where they I think it was over 700 passes but couldn't score. And they end up being picked off by Italy in the semi-final. And just a lack of penetration. It was the same there in Qatar, that they hammered Costa Rica, was it? They beat 7-0, but then end up losing to Japan, and they end up going out to Morocco on penalties after a 0-0 draw.
they didn't have Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal, so I mean, that's probably
personnel.
sure.
the greater difference. Yeah. Should we close it out there on the Champions League? There's much more to discuss. I'm sure over the summer. I'm sure Miguel, when he's back in, when he's finally left Munich, will have more to say.
It's extraordinary. He's been taken hostage by Roy Hodgson, which is I understand is what's happened.
He was on the same flight as Roy Hodgson. Roy, also, as we understand it, is in the same hotel. So, a meeting of minds there. We'll rejoin you for part 2 in just a sec. Okay, we are back for the second part of Libero number 23. I'm here, of course, with Tariq and Jonathan. Now, in the search for more football due to my lifelong addiction, I found myself switching on to DAZN TV, the aforementioned DAZN, to see if I will be able to watch the Club World Cup, because I just cannot wait for this tournament, I can tell you that. But what I did do was catch some highlights of Club America versus LAFC, and LAFC will be the final qualifier for this tournament after some jiggery-pokery with one of the previous qualifiers. Which team was that got kicked out? Was that Leon, yeah, of Mexico, I should say. Yeah, and what that means is that Olivier Giroud and Hugo Lloris will be at this tournament, which, there's a flashback for you, and that's going to be excellent. But this Club World Cup, it's bubbling up, it's happening. I think some of us felt it wasn't going to happen, didn't we? What do you think about that, Tariq? I mean, presumably, we had no idea. The details were so sketchy for such a while, weren't they?
This tournament was actually at the heart of the massive fracture between Gianni Infantino and Alexander Shevrin. This was the civil war. I was there at a meeting in Bogota in Colombia, 2018 March, and Infantino walked into the room of the FIFA Council and he plonked these documents down. He said, "Guys, I've got a $20 billion deal to sell this new competition and some other stuff to who, Gianni? I can't tell you, but you've got to sign it. I've signed an NDA. You've got to let me go and do this. And I've got to do it all in 60 days. And that led to absolute ructions, and we're still kind of feeling that now. That didn't happen. And that company was going to be SoftBank, which is a kind of Japanese tech investment business, but also, intriguingly, or maybe not that surprisingly, had massive investment from Saudi Arabia.
Wow. What do you know?
So that didn't happen. And then what we were going to have, then there was some sort of piece. UEFA were trying to make sure that the Club World Cup was going to be not as good as it could be. So what were they going to do? They're going to say, right, okay, you can have 4 Champions League teams and 4 Europa League teams. We're going to do something like this. And in the end, they came to an agreement where there was going to be this Club World Cup, and then COVID happened. So the first tournament actually should have been in China. Remember China? Big in football? Spending all that money? All that feels like decades ago. So the first tournament
Oscar's still there, I believe.
He just left.
Did he?
Left.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Probably the richest man. He's going to buy, what do they buy now? Entire media businesses, a media empire. All of Brazilian media is going to be owned by Oscar, like Ronaldo owns Portugal's. So that tournament didn't go ahead. And here we are. So a hurried, organised Club World Cup in USA 2025.
Yeah, and that hurry includes this rather odd transfer window that's open. That again, I get the impression that took a lot of negotiating between UEFA, FIFA, various bodies, and all that. And part of that is Cristiano Ronaldo being up for hire. Though it remains opaque, doesn't it? Because we don't know the meaning of his social media posts, of course. Far be it for him to give an interview to explain these things. And which of the 2 clubs that we're looking at that he could join?
So Al Hilal, I think, are the favourites, but Palmeiras have also sort of expressed an interest. So Al Hilal, of course, huge rivals, as I understand it, of Al Nassr. So it really would be the equivalent of, like, I don't know, Sol Campbell going on a short-term loan to play in the Club World Cup for Arsenal, and then popping back to Spurs, and that'd be fine. Nobody will mind. Or Palmeiras for the Brazilian side.
Didn't Haji do this when he to join Stour for the World Club in?
This is absolutely right. So Stour had won the European Cup in '86 without Haji. Haji was still playing for Sporting Studendesk, and he was taken supposedly on a short-term deal to Dynamo Kiev to play against Dynamo Kiev. Scored the only goal in that game in must have been the autumn of '86. I can't remember, October '86, something like that. And then he just never went back. So it's good to see that policies of Nicolae Ceausescu's Romania are being employed by FIFA. I think that's absolutely the model to follow. I mean, this LAFC beating Club America, if they really want stars, they just have a FIFA All-Stars team. If that's what we want, if that's what this nonsense has been reduced to, let's have Cristiano Ronaldo, let's have Neymar, let's have Zlatan Ibrahimovic, let's have the AI rendered ghost of Stanley Matthews. Because it wouldn't make it any less farcical. Hang on. Yeah. It wouldn't make it any more farcical. It would maintain the level of farcicalness. I've lost that sentence, but farce, that's the key point.
But guys, this the transfer window first, is it? So just to explain to people not familiar with what this transfer window is, it opened day before we're recording on June the 1st, and it's going to be for 2 weeks. So essentially, imagine you could basically sell a player. If you need money, and there's plenty of clubs that need desperate cash, right, to try and make their books balance, you sell your best player for 2 weeks to someone, and then you can come back. I mean, it's a very odd scenario. And there's another window in the same tournament as well. So we're going to have the group stage, and that's when our normal transfer window will open, the one that we're all familiar with, in July. And you can then buy players for the knockouts.
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
It's a really, really weird and wonderful, or maybe not that wonderful, concept they've got. But again, it just shows how FIFA have been quite desperate to get attention to this thing. And this kind of zany, wacky, Gianni idea, let's do this as well, it just kind of fits into a competition that no one really wants. But FIFA have obviously offered the winners $125 million. And they've got that strange $1 billion DAZN deal and all of these things. And they've got to start selling tickets for this. This has been the other big nightmare for this competition. Some of these matches are in enormous stadiums, including in Pasadena, where we had the World Cup final in '94. It's a massive stadium over there. So what happened with the pricing was too high. We're going to have a load of gimmicks. Prices have come down. It just seems, as to quote Wilson, one of the great Wilson quotes, farce.
The other thing that this transfer window does is it highlights the basic problem you will always have with any Club World Cup. There's a reason why it hasn't happened before, and that's because there is no room for it in the calendar. So the European Cup starts by playing it midweek, when every club in Europe pretty much is playing at weekends. So there's a space there, and they've just invented floodlights, which are new and kind of modern, and it fits. Oh, we got air travel. I mean, with tragic consequences, it turned out, but we got air travel, we got floodlights. This is all great and new. There is no space for Club World Cup. You can't have a Club World Cup where a team. I mean, you could have it, but it would be environmentally terrible, and the impact on players' bodies if you had players, flying from Munich on the Saturday to Buenos Aires on the Wednesday to fly back to play in Dortmund on the Saturday. It's nonsense. You can't do it. And so if you fit it in at the end of a season, because it's not established, you're always going to have players who are between clubs, players who, say you're Alejandro Garnacho and Manchester United have qualified for this thing. You're not going to shake a leg in that tournament because you know that you're on your way out at the end of it. So just placing it is very difficult. And then you've got an issue with who qualifies, because what you've ended up with is a Club World Cup, which at some level has got to be to determine who is the best club in the world. Well, you'd like to think that in that conversation you might include the league champions of England, the league champions of Spain, the league champions of Italy, and none of them are there. So I understand you can't, at the end of May, go, oh, Liverpool, do you fancy coming and playing in this tournament in 2 weeks? Clearly you can't do that. But it's almost impossible to do this. So if you look at the early attempts to set up things like the Club World Cup, you had this thing called the Copa Rio in 1951. So during the World Cup, the Nations World Cup in 1950, people have thought, it would be great if we did this with club sides. So they try and do it. But the problem is they're getting clubs who won the title the year before. So they actually get quite a good list. They get the Austrian champions, the Yugoslav champions, the Uruguayan champions. It's not a bad list of clubs, but they get a lot of teams who won the year before. And then after a couple of seasons, everyone's like, this is exhausting. Why are we doing this? And by the third running of it, 5 of the 8 clubs are Brazilian. So it's never worked before. And I think there are really sort of fundamental issues why it cannot work.
Well, yeah, and one of the oddities is that you've got Red Bull Salzburg, who came, I think, if not second last, around that in the
Austrian
in the
League.
groups. Well, no, in the Austrian League, but in the actual Champions League group stage, they were absolutely horrific, weren't they? With Pep Linders, obviously, we're back to Pep Guardiola, who's now his assistant. He was in charge and was actually removed just before Jurgen Klopp took over as global head of soccer at Red Bull. The Red Bull empire is probably one we need to discuss at length, I would suggest, on this pod. Another bit of transfer news, of course, for this tournament was Trent Alexander-Arnold, after all that, getting 10 million for Liverpool, for Real Madrid. Can you unboo someone? I suppose is the first question. Is 10 million enough to, to douse the pitchforks, or is it what that deal? Barney wrote a very good piece, sort of fairly suspicious of the motives of where the money's come for this. It's interesting, isn't it? But that's the first we're going to see of Trent in a Madrid shirt is at this tournament. What do we think of that one, Tariq?
Yeah, it's about this whole competition is for the European teams is all about money. I mean, look, if you think about it, the prize for winning is 125 million. That's huge. We're talking about 3.5 weeks. That is more than teams get. Most teams would get from a whole season of playing domestic football from their TV rights. So basically, FIFA buying legitimacy, saying and Gianni Infantino said this is the biggest prize money in football, and like it's something to be celebrated. And again, you just got to stop and take a step back. This is the global governing body. The people who are supposed to look after football are the people also promoting this type of behaviour and this type of, I guess, rapaciousness, the culture. And yeah, Barney's point is right. So basically, Real Madrid, it's a speculative move. We plot 10 million down here for this guy now. By the way, he could have joined on a free after the group stage. So you're buying him for 3 matches, because I said there's 2 transfer windows. So essentially, for those 3 matches they're going to play, they've popped in 10 million, and hoping that they'll go deep in the tournament. And because of the largesse of FIFA and DAZN and maybe Saudi, whoever, you get a return. But it just all sounds so grubby, doesn't it? And
Yeah,
and don't forget all these teams.
I was going to say.
Go on.
I was going to say that 125 million. That's for the winners, correct? Yeah, that's what the winners. Yeah. Now, if you are, say, the chairman of a Southwest London club that has some sort of financial jiggery pokery, and you've had to sell your women's team or sell a couple of adjacent hotels, is this a bigger target for your manager winning this competition than if you? I mean, presumably,
yes,
Chelsea, of course. Todd Bowley and Egbali are going to be saying to Maresca, "Get this won, get as far as you can." How does that affect the Premier League season, the season after? If they've gone full gun for this after a really long, 60-odd game season, what does that? I mean, it imbalances European football, doesn't it? It imbalances domestic.
It imbalances this thing. Actually, imbalances this thing imbalances world football. To be honest, so we've got the European issue here. Don't forget, these teams are coming from Africa, from Asia, from South America, and we've got an amateur team from New Zealand. I mean, they were going to get $3.5 million, which is like they're going to win the league every year in New Zealand. This impact of this money every 4 years it's going to unbalance all sorts of things. You're going to have already in South America, Brazilian teams are winning the Copa Libertadores in a way that they had never won. We've had last four champions have been Brazilian.
Last six.
Four, I think, last six. There you go. And
last six and four have been all Brazilian finals. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're already. Again, you just go back to FIFA. FIFA's job is to protect football. And what we're going to have as a result of this is potentially even more polarization, but in different parts of the world.
But do you not think this is part of FIFA's plan? If they, say you have a couple of Brazilian super clubs, you have, I don't know, a Casablanca super club, that leads to a World League. Once those domestic competitions are so imbalanced they cannot work, what's the only sort of solution? And maybe that World League initially doesn't include Europe. Maybe Europe is resistant because it is obviously wealthier. Football is wealthier. If you're creating essentially franchises across the globe, then the logical place those franchises to gather is in FIFA's World League as they seize power from UEFA, which is ultimately the goal of everything FIFA do.
Just one question, Tariq, you may know a bit of a final question. This doesn't strike me as very good for the environment, this competition, nor does the next few World Cups. What's FIFA's policy on green? Have they just gone full Trump on this and just decided that this doesn't matter? Because I remember previously that this type of thing was discussed in your congresses and your FIFA meetings at World Cups. What's happened to that idea? Because this is just air miles. It's just incredible.
It's a good question. It's one of our time as well, the answer as well. So they've signed up to, I think, UN sustainability guidelines and human rights guidelines, all these things you sign up to, right? And then you make a big splashy announcement to say you've signed up to it. And then you could completely, ignore it. And who's there to question you? It's not going to be us because we haven't had a press conference in 2 years. And also, who cares as well? There's no repercussion. Like if you're in a world where you can pretty much do what you like, you can ignore these things you've signed. Who's going to complain? By the way, look, there's a transfer window. Where's Ronaldo going? Is he going to the question you asked is really an important question, but most people and FIFA certainly don't seem to care about this stuff. And the kind of the show moves on, doesn't it? And I wonder who Ronaldo will be playing for when we cover the Club World Cup.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's the most important takeaway, isn't it, of everything, is where Ronaldo is going to play next. And what a note to end Libero 23 on. The rest of the gang will be back towards the end of this week. But thanks for joining us. To repeat, if you could like, subscribe, review, etc., Spotify and YouTube, that would be very helpful, and other platforms too, your Apple Podcasts and all the rest of it. Of course, we have our email address, liberopodcast0@gmail.com. Please get in touch there. We've had some interesting correspondence. But I should say thank you to Jonathan.
Thank you.
And thank you to Tariq. And thank you to producer Tom. As ever, the wind beneath our wings. Producer Tom Bassam, we should say. And thank you for all of you for joining us next time.